please kick us off?
I will. Good evening. Good morning to some, I guess, really early morning. My name is Noemi Herzig, and I'm the Director of Jewish Cultural Arts and Education at the JCC in Ann Arbor. Some housekeeping items. We are recording this session. We have activated the closed caption feature. Click on the CC icon on the bottom of your screen if you would like to use it. All attendees are muted. Please use the chat feature to send in your questions. The views expressed by Chuck Newman and his guests are their own and do not necessarily reflect the views of the Ann Arbor JCC. All previous conversation recordings can be found on the JCC webpage at jccannarbor.org. And now it is my pleasure to call on our host, Charles Newman.
Thank you, Noemi, and thank you to the Jewish Community Center of Ann Arbor for hosting us, as always. Thank you all for attending. And of course, thank you to our guests, who we will meet in a moment. As those of you who are regular viewers of this show, you know that typically they're scheduled every 2 weeks. But when I heard our guest story, I said, we can't wait that long. We have to do this now. So that's why we are having this one only a week from our previous show. And those of you who have attended the prior shows we've had on the Ukraine know that we have been emphasizing the need to combat the pernicious Russian misinformation campaign that has been propagated to reduce the American support for the Ukrainian cause. And I'd like to encourage all of you who would like to know more how you can fight back by propagating positive messages, by sharing them on your social media. And you would have to go to demcast.com/disinformation or disinfo. And there you will find an explanation of how you can do that. And perhaps, Noemi, might you be able to get that into chat? That was
what you sent me this morning?
Yes.
Yes. I
will
put it in chat.
I'm a little sleep deprived too. So yes, thank you for putting it in there as well. Yeah, there's a lot, as I say, there's pernicious disinformation, things along the lines of why should America pay more for gas to help Ukrainians and whatever. And as disgusting as it is, it's real, and there's something we can do about it. Those of you who attended our show, the one before the last one, heard our speaker, Alexander Sherba, talk about his book, Ukraine versus Darkness. Due to Sharon got it for me. It's a great read. Well, I won't say it's a great read. I'll say it's a very important read. It makes you understand that there's only one possible outcome for this war, and that is the Russians have to be defeated. There will never be a negotiated peace with them if they are not defeated. And the case is made extraordinarily compellingly. I believe Sharon will be putting into chat where you can order the book. Yeah, and again, I really do recommend it. So our first guest is Derrick Miller. He's Executive Vice President of the Community Action Network, based here in Ann Arbor. And Eric, you want to tell us a little bit about CAN and its mission?
Yeah, absolutely. So Community Action Network, we're based in Washtenaw County. We currently have 7 community centers in the area. And CAN focuses on education, housing stabilization, and community building. So we have after-school programs and educational summer camps, Youth Works, which is a youth employment readiness program. And then under our housing stabilization work, we do eviction prevention, utility shut-off prevention services, but also food security. And on that note, we're actually the largest food distributor in partnership with food gatherers in Washtenaw County. Actually, one of our locations alone, the Bryant Community Center, is the largest food distribution location in the entire county as well. And then in terms of community building, basically like back to school barbecues, Thanksgiving potlucks, holiday parties, community cleanups, resident council meetings, and the such.
And why did you join CAN?
It actually happened through about 14 years ago. I was teaching at the time and had the summer availability, and a summer camp director position came up. At that same time, CAN was offered to start managing the Bryant and Northside community centers through the City of Ann Arbor's Parks and Rec. And that same summer, I was offered the director position at the Bryant Community Center. Immediately saw the amount of impact and potential I had in that kind of environment compared to in the educational environment, and really just ran with it.
14 years. You seem to be holding up well, but then I understand that you did serve our country in the Marine Corps in Iraq. Is that true?
Yeah. So I was in the Marine Corps from 2000 2006. I was in the reserves, and so I was concurrently also getting my bachelor's degree at University of Michigan in history, nonetheless. And as it's now playing out in real time, history repeating itself. And then from 2004 to 2005, I did serve in Iraq. More specifically, I was in the Ramadi area while I was there.
Did you see combat?
I did. I personally did not, fortunately, have to shoot at anybody, but literally on our base every other day was a lot of indirect fire, mortars, things like that. People were killed on our base, and it was actually a base of only, I think it was about 500 or so folks. It was very much, Ramadi, just for context, is the capital of the Al Anbar province, and that's part of the Sunni population, which was of Saddam's background as well. So very much a fairly hostile environment.
An excellent characterization. And what was the impulse that said, I've got to go see what I can do to help Ukraine?
I feel like a lot of, just people around the world, as soon as it started happening, just glued to TV, glued to the news. And that very night, I was actually about to go to bed when it started. And you can even go through my old Facebook posts and find my first post about my opinion on what's transpiring, both internally in terms of how things were being represented in our own media, but also in terms of what's going to essentially transpire. And unfortunately, the weeks would go by, and I was seeing what I figured was going to be unfolding in real time. And then at one point, a fellow Marine that I served with had reached out and said, hey, I'm going to be going. If anybody wants to join me, please let me know. And he ended up, this is a captain that I served with in the Marine Corps in Iraq as well. And so he got there about a week before I did. And then I linked up with him, and that's actually how I linked up with Nataliya and the Swedes and about 20 to 30 other countries. And like literally you could go an hour and meet people from 20 different countries easily.
Well, this is probably a good time for me to attempt to share an interview I did with Nataliya earlier. I did not want to impose upon her to have to be up at 2 o'clock in the morning, but she has. And for that, we thank her because we can ask some questions. But I still think it's worthy to play that interview if I can. So and somehow I should be able to. Good afternoon in your case, Nataliya. Thank you for being with us today. And I'm sure all of my listeners.
Chuck, you'll need a screen share it. We can hear it, but we can't see it.
Get a firsthand impression of just what is happening on the. Thank you. Unfortunately.
So first you screen your.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. That's what I did. And then I clicked share. And do you see me frozen now?
Yep, you're good.
Okay. And we will continue again. Ukrainian border, and we share our admiration for you and all the others who, your courageous defense of your country and sympathize with the suffering that this war has caused. Tell me a little bit about yourself. Did you think a war was coming?
Actually, we had so many signs and warnings, but we didn't believe this would happen. Like the evening before the war, like February 23rd, in the evening, that was Wednesday, my husband came home and he was like, there is so many information, so many warnings about war. What if you take our daughter and just leave for a while, you know, just to stay away from all the news so that I'm like, okay, that you are safe. And I said, like, come on, there is no way something's gonna happen. I don't have that feeling. I don't want to leave. And the next day he woke me up at 6 a.m. saying like, Kyiv is bombed and we have war. So
Where were you living at the time?
in Lviv, that's Western Ukraine, the closest to Polish border. And I was like feeling very secure there because countries like US or Great Britain, they moved their embassies from Kyiv to Lviv. And I was like, nothing's gonna happen. But after a few hours, we were already on the road with my daughter and our dog and my niece. And while we were waiting in a already very long queue to cross the border, our president signed the martial law, so we had to say goodbye right at the border to my husband. He wasn't allowed, you know, to leave the country. So we took our stuff and we came here to Poland. And it's been like 2 months and a couple of days we are here. And if you ask me whether I've ever had this thought about the war, I still don't believe it. Like it's like it's happening. We are involved. We are helping. We are like collecting money and buying like everything. We are buying so much different things, so many different things, so much stuff, and it still is like, you know, like it's not real.
This is in your, you say you're buying things. This is in your role as helping with the relief of people who are leaving the country.
One-off, because like when I met these wonderful people from Sweden who came here to the border just to be here on the ground and to help people on the ground, and then they introduced me to Derrick, another wonderful human being, like coming here from across the whole world just to help, you know, not only like donating, collecting money, but even being here and helping with physical things, doing physical things like bringing heavy bags for women stuck in long lines. And that matters also. So that's part of. And the other thing is those who are abroad, so what Ukrainians do, like some people stayed in Ukraine and they collect humanitarian aid and they collect the needs. And other people who are in other countries, they are buying this stuff. They are arranging the delivery and the logistics. So like it works like a huge chain of people trying to bring the victory as soon as possible, trying to help.
Yeah,
And everybody does what he or she feels like doing. Like, I'm good at shopping, so I'm gonna search for this stuff on internet and buy it.
Where's your husband now?
In Lviv.
And can any Ukrainian citizen be, would all Ukrainian citizens be accepted into Poland? Are the Polish authorities taking everybody in, or do they have restrictions on who can come in?
No, they take everybody. They even don't they're not very strict about the documents. So people without any biometric international passports, people with only the internal national ID cards, or people with old passports, like old type passports or already expired passports, they are all allowed. So everybody enters the country. Like kids with no passports, just the original of the Ukrainian document in Ukrainian, like the birth certificate or something.
Oh,
But that concerns only women and children. Men aged between 18 and 60, they cannot leave the country except for those who like have 3 kids or they have like maybe some diseases or whatever, and they are allowed to leave.
and how long do they stay at the border before they move on?
Well, it depends, but there are cases when people stay in lines for like more than 24 hours. If we talk about those who cross the border by foot, or like me myself, I spent 17 hours waiting in the car,
And how old's your daughter?
9.5,
And your niece?
21.
So she was able to help. Is it more difficult now to get to the border because the Russians have been trying to disrupt movement?
It is. It is because like today I had a call with a mom. She's already in Sweden. She evacuated earlier with a younger kid, and now she's trying to evacuate her daughter, 19-year-old. She's again a kid from Dnipro. And her biggest concern is that her daughter reaches the border safely. Because when Russian troops bomb our train stations, so people are actually afraid to travel. Not all of them, of course, but if you're not there and you don't know where your kid is and you don't have the connection 24/7, so you have grounds to be worried.
24 hours in line? Is there shelter for people waiting to get across the border?
Actually, people like Derrick, people like our friends from the Swedish organizations, people from other countries, European countries, who came here to volunteer, they started arranging. People like Ukrainians also on the Ukrainian side and Ukrainians on the Polish side, they started arranging these kind of things. But the first day, the second day, the third day, there was like nothing.
Let's talk a little bit more about your experience. Once you did get to the border, first of all, what was your profession, excuse me, in Ukraine?
I'm working in Ukrainian IT company, and I'm the manager of internal language school. And actually my company was offering us the relocation, but because I didn't believe it would happen, I didn't believe they would dare. So I didn't use that opportunity at that time when I was offered it. Then there was like the message like, leave. So you take your daughter and you take her to the safe place because you yourself cannot stand the air alarm, like being so loud. You don't know what to do yourself the first time. I know my friends who stayed there and they've been living with this for 2 months already. So they say like, we think we're getting used to this, but we are not. Because waking up at night and spending a night in a corridor, trying to hide like behind the walls or spending a night in a water closet, it's not okay. And my experience, so when we went to the border, actually we were waiting 14 hours in a car, and that border crossing point, not all of them originally designed for pedestrians. So that one was designed only for vehicles to cross the border. And because of the martial law, so we had to get out of the car, and then we were waiting for somebody to pick us up. And the border police officers on the Ukrainian side, they were very helpful. So they were stopping the cars, knocking on their windows and saying like, would you mind picking up this woman and these kids and whatever? And then some companies, they sent the buses. So the buses were driving directly to the borderline. And they were they were like packed with people, with women and children, and they were taking them across the border for free. So people started reacting within 24 hours, but that was obviously not enough for that amount of people trying to evacuate. And actually, the moment when you reach the border and you have to say goodbye, like to your husband, and you don't know when you see him next time, that was actually really heartbreaking. And I saw a lot of men and women like crying there, like, because that's the first day of war, and people were like very emotional and stressed and scared. Like I was going to Poland because my dad lives here, but there are like thousands of people who hit the road and they have no idea what is their final destination. They're just taking their kids to the safe place, and then they find themselves in another country with a language barrier, with the right to find the job, but actually low possibilities to use this right. Again, because of the language barrier, because of different profession, like whatever the reason is. So when I met our friends and when I met Derrick, so like, I'm actually not the one to be helped because I feel more or less stable. I still have my job because my company is still working and can grant like for some time that I have my job and I have my salary, and I have my dad here who's going to help me. So I need to help other Ukrainians.
And how did that come about? You crossed the border. Your father presumably was there to help you.
Yeah, he picked us up. We arrived to where we are. And I just remember that probably the first 48 hours, all we did, we were just scrolling the news.
And how did you hook up to, well, you said you were motivated to help. How did you find someone that would use your skills?
Actually, they found my dad. My dad was waiting for me at the parking lot. And there were two ladies in an ambulance van. And then they slightly hit his car. And when I got out to see what's happening, like my dad doesn't speak English. So when I came out from the shop, she told me, Nataliya, there are two ladies, they hit my car and they were trying to explain something. I only understood Ukraine. Go and talk to them. So that's how I met two Annas, nurses from Sweden. And they came with that ambulance van packed with humanitarian aid. And we started talking and I was like, what are you doing? How can I help? And their problem was that they were helping people here, but they both didn't speak neither Ukrainian nor Russian. A lot of people from Ukraine, they speak Russian, I understand it. And the people whom they were helping didn't speak English. And they needed me as a translator. And the same moment, I was already handling some family being evacuated to Sweden, and they had some questions they urgently needed answers for. That's how it all started. The next day, I was already in their office in the hotel lobby, and we were deciding where we go, how we do it, where do I help, what I'm responsible for, and that's it. So it all started with the translation help. And actually, I've never thought before that knowing the language can help other people get to safe and get a little bit more, of the feeling that everything's gonna be fine. Because when they come here and they see foreigners, they're very grateful that people from other countries are willing to help, but they don't understand what is going on. They need information. They're so stressed. So they need somebody to hold them by their hand and tell them in the language that they understand and they feel comfortable with, like, you are safe now, you are okay. Here are people who want to help you, and they are here to help. So just calm down, and we will take care of you. And I saw the effect, how it works. When people hear other people just talking to them in their language.
What's your biggest obstacle right now in helping these people?
That there are only 24 hours in a day. I would love to have
If
more.
there were more time, what more could you do for them?
I'd probably stay there 24/7 in the refugee camp, just to talk to them and to give them information, because what I've seen, no matter how many handouts you give to people with information in written, they still want somebody to talk with.
Tell us a little bit about the refugee camp. What does it consist of? How large is it?
Well, actually, the biggest one in this area is in Przemysl. I'm not sure if I spell it like correctly. If I pronounce the city name correctly, it's like Przemysl. And it's in the in Tesco, in a former supermarket. And they can host up to a few thousand people. There, I believe you've been there also. And it's really very well organized. And the first evening I got there, I was also invited to a so-called meeting of country representatives. And being a specialist in an IT company, having like lots of meetings in a day, what I've seen there, it was like what I see every day in my real life job. And people like managers get together and they decide what they do, how they do, they synchronize, they try to be on the same page. But the difference was that here people like met for the first time. They came from different parts of the world with different experience. They know nothing about each other, but how they cared for the refugees, for Ukrainians being kept there in shelters, how they were fighting about the security because they put a lot of effort to avoid trafficking. And there was that very evening when I got there was a question raised that we are out of buses, but we have some applications from like private drivers that they can take people to other destinations. Do we allow that? And people like, no, we are not letting these women and these kids go with the people we don't know. And that evening, that was the first time when I cried after the war started and when I came here, because it was so touching seeing like people, I don't know, there was a guy from Mexico, like, come on, where's Ukraine and Mexico, really? And he was like fighting so hard to convince other people not to let Ukrainian women and children like being lifted by some unknown drivers. Like, no way. And then I called my husband and said, like, you don't even imagine what is happening here. You don't even imagine what people came here and how they are fighting here to help, how they're even trying to build this community of volunteers who are helping, and they want to work as a system. And actually in that refugee camp, it really looks like a very well-built system when everybody has to be registered before entering. All the volunteers, they need to go through the COVID test. Every refugee is registered. Everybody's wearing the bracelet with QR code. Mine is already worn out. And no one enters without that bracelet. There is a lot of police and border police guards there. They're checking everyone. And they arranged kindergarten there. So there is a schedule for the kindergarten, and in the evening, they like switch on some movies or sing karaoke with kids. There is a pet corner. There is also 24/7 world open kitchen when everybody gets like hot food, beverages and everything. There is medical corner. So like when you get there, of course, if you're like leaving your home behind and your loved ones behind, it's not a hotel. We understand that. But so much effort is put into making this place safe and as much comfortable as possible, that like you can only like worship these people.
Who are these people who are these all volunteers? Are they government sponsored or?
Mostly they are volunteers. Sometimes they are representatives of different non-governmental organizations. And they are there because of some inner voice or something. They were there like the next day the war started. These are the people who didn't want to wait, that I'm gonna stay in my couch and do nothing. There are big organizations, they will handle everything. What I've seen, the people I've met, these are the people who like want to take action right here and right now, because they don't want to wait. They don't want these people at the border in lines to wait for help. They want to be there, like Derrick. People have to stay in this line like 10 hours, 14 hours. But these people need gloves because it's cold at night. They need blankets because it's cold at night. They need hot water, they need drinking water. They need somebody to help them with the bags because they're heavy and they're mostly women with kids. Imagine you are a mom traveling with 3 kids, not traveling, evacuating with 3 kids. Like there was a mom a week ago. She came with 3 kids and we took her from the border and she stayed overnight here, and then we sent her by plane to Italy. And in the evening, when she finally got here, she told me, you know, Nataliya, when I was crossing the border, so when you hand the documents to the border police officer, what do? You just have the eye contact and everything. So I don't even remember, was it a man or a woman?
Mm.
And her words were like, if not all the volunteers who were helping me all the way, I would just break down in tears somewhere in the middle of the road.
Well, this is a very inspiring story. I would ask you if you want more volunteers I am going to ask you, are more volunteers needed? But you need to understand that not all going to be like Derrick. Derrick is exceptional. But is there a need for more volunteers?
You know, it depends on what kind of volunteering job you want to do. If you decide, well, that's only my personal opinion. If you decide what exactly you can do and how much time you can devote to it, then it's easy to find the organization you can join, or like the organization you can donate to and spread information about them and ask your friends to donate as well.
Derrick, you have your assignment. That is to provide information to our viewers as to how they can volunteer and how they can donate. So, Nataliya, thank you so much for being with us today. You'll be in our thoughts and our hearts. Thank you for what you do. And again, I want to express our admiration for the Ukrainian people and those who are helping.
Thank you so much. And I really appreciate your colors today.
I know.
Well, I promised you, at least some of you, that if you tuned in tonight, you would hear some heartwarming stories as well. And I hope you're as moved as I am by not only Nataliya, but volunteers like Derrick, who just felt they had to do something. Hard to transition from that, Derrick. Do you have any Polish or Ukrainian roots? Is that what prompted you at all?
Not one bit. But I do have a lot of sense of broader humanity in me. And that was one of the things that truly compelled me. You know, it's what helps drive me day to day here in our own community. And then knowing and seeing what was transpiring, I felt there was no other option but to do something.
Now, I know you referenced Operation Aid. Is that the Swedish organization? Can you tell
That
us
is
a little bit
correct.
about them?
Yeah, so Operation Aid. So when my Marine friend was there first, he actually got connected with them. And the reality is that, there's the organizations that we hear about that are doing work. And then when I was actually there, you get a better sense of, at least in that context, who's actually really, showing up and doing some big work. And this Operation Aid group was phenomenal. They're the Swedish volunteers. They were there pretty much almost immediately and have been rotating in steadily additional volunteers. Last I checked, they, again, it's a group of volunteers. They're not even government representatives, but they're the ones that are helping navigate their government's processes. And they've already relocated to Sweden over 2,000 families. They're also the group that, thanks to the 32,000 that I raised back at home, helped buy a minibus because transportation was also a pretty big issue, not only in Poland, by the way, but also even within Ukraine. And the Swedish group, a lot of the foreign volunteers there, they're basically doing everything and anything that they could to help get people into safe homes.
Would you whom would you recommend that our people donate to? Maybe don't answer that right now. Tell me a little bit about what your plans are, what your dreams are now, and then maybe we can talk about where people can donate.
Yeah, absolutely. So, literally it was about 4 days of planning before I was on a flight to Poland, and fingers crossed that all of my connectors were going to work and I was going to find myself at the border. I was literally fully expecting having to sleep in a sleeping bag and a tent because I had no clue what was ultimately going to be transpiring. And this was about 3 or 4 weeks already in. So there's the folks that went there literally in day one with even less structure to deal with as well. And one of my key goals was to try to get as much cash into Ukrainians' hands. And within about 2 days, which in reality, I could have easily have done it and felt perfectly fine within an hour, but ended up spreading it over 2 days just to get a feel for how everything is working. But went through about $14,000 worth of cash converted in Polish zloty. And it is honestly one of the most impactful things I could have done. And then over the course of the next week or so, ultimately allocated the rest of the 32,000 that I had reserved up. And then, I went here on PTO. This is not something that our nonprofit is not international. This is not something that's under its mission.
PTO?
Yeah, paid time off. I was using my vacation time to do all this work. I didn't feel it was ethical for me to even ask our board to, although they probably would have let me, it's not right. And that's kind of one of the key things about just even being a professional in that environment was immense. Because, you guys have probably seen this in your own social media and things like that, but clients on display and just kind of not really understanding what's truly transpiring for these people and being mindful of that. And yeah, but anyways, and so after that original time, came back home, have been obviously doing, chipping away at still some stuff in Poland/Ukraine, but I also have my responsibilities to CAN as well. To be honest, if I had enough resources and if CAN's financial future was very well settled, I would absolutely go back because I've never felt literally we always say to some degree, the work that we're doing is life-changing. And don't get me wrong, the work that we do at CAN is absolutely life-changing and life-saving. But the immediacy, the depth, the breadth of issues that are going on, and even the little bit amount of resource, that $32,000, it did an immense job there as well. And I can only imagine if I had more resources to work with. And I just know because of my background in this field, and both in terms of my military experience, but also in social services and also even education. I actually helped set up a classroom at a hostel in a building that wasn't even intended to be an apartment building, but it now houses about 300 Ukrainian women and children. And they didn't have any school supplies, arts and crafts, or any of that kind of stuff. So we spent a day doing a whole bunch of shopping and bought like $5 or $6 grand worth of supplies. And a few days later, as I'm getting like, I'm already on my flight back because this was toward the tail end of my time, and getting pictures of, you know, these kids, and there's a Ukrainian teacher, and now the Swedish group is actually hiring not only the Ukrainian teacher, but also an arts teacher, and trying to create some semblance of normalcy for the kids, and making sure that they're you know, getting their education and things like that. And so you just really can't go wrong. Like, you literally could not go wrong going there and bringing some resources, because the need is so tremendous.
If someone wanted to support relief efforts there, what would you recommend they do?
So certainly, like Operation Aid, it's operationaid.org. They're doing fantastic work. They're there for definitely the longer haul. In contrast, at least American presence, there was a lot of Americans that I interacted with, but in terms of kind of formal organizations or even like helping with the relocation process, did not exist at all. Like at the refugee centers, what you'll see is literally like kind of a box with a flag on it, and it basically is a country representative there to help with relocation efforts and things like that. And you'd see Swedish, Finnish, German, Italian, French, and several others, but very lacking was British as well as American presence in both of those refugee centers. And those are both areas of tremendous resources, but there's a true disconnect there. Yeah, so anyways, operationaid.org is an organization I would certainly highly recommend. If you'd like to go with kind of a more well-established name, the World Central Kitchen was literally everywhere. Like, they were at the train station, every train station. Like, you get off at a train station and they're there. But they're also even on the Ukrainian side as well, certainly on the border and the refugee centers, pretty much everywhere. So their presence was quite astounding. There was actually a very well organized Israeli group that was helping out a lot in the border. They had actually the most significant presence on both sides of the border, helping with just resource navigation and things like that. I think some of them were affiliated with, I might be butchering the name, but it's Natan, N-A-T-A-N. And so they also had a very significant presence. But I like, you literally can walk like, 20 steps and you're literally talking to a British Sikh in a Sikh tent with an Afghani that speaks Russian, is doing translations. And then I would be carrying supplies in a Swedish person's personal vehicle that he literally just gave me the keys to go disappear for an entire day, to go deliver resources with a Ukrainian refugee to a hostel provided by the Polish government. And that was common, extraordinarily common. It's literally the most fascinating thing I've seen. Just the amount of international presence there as well. So anyways, Natan is another one of those organizations that really did bubble up for me as well.
How do you account for the absence of a U.S. presence? Do you have any insight?
I think there's a couple different things. Proximity is certainly a very evident thing. One of the things, again, like part of my background is in history. And so this is actually an area that I've studied in the past. And then there's kind of a reaction of like what I would call kind of proximal danger. So for example, the Polish government, and Polish people, their involvement is bar none. They have been highly open arms. They've been very welcoming and pumping a tremendous amount of resources. If you haven't heard, they're also dealing with the oil embargo or whatever they're calling it, which is materializing because they see Russia as a direct threat, and they're not wrong. And the further you kind of go deeper into Europe, that kind of proximal danger gets further and further away. And then there's us over in the United States, where this isn't necessarily perceived as a direct threat. And so I see that as being a pretty big contributing factor. It's kind of this apathy that we can sometimes find ourselves into as well. And then another part is just like not knowing. you don't know the people there, you don't speak the language, you probably have never even been to Europe. Those all certainly add up as barriers, and you do have to be initiative taker. You have to deal with ambiguity. Literally, you would start the day with a plan. Half hour in, the plan's up in the air because some other crisis popped up, and you have to adapt to it.
I understand you were there on the Ukrainian Easter. Is that correct?
No, that was a American friend that I had connected with. I came back about, I think, like a week right before then, as well. And so that individual, as well as several others that I partnered with, they actually had been going like to Kyiv and to other areas in Ukraine. And actually, one of the key issues and needs right now is the areas of Ukraine that were formerly Russian controlled, and they're completely devastated. Both not in terms of like actual buildings being destroyed, but supply lines. There's no semblance of like grocery stores and the ability to get resources in. Nataliya had mentioned the other day that like seeds are needed because people are needing to plant their own food, because getting like access to even just those bare necessities is becoming an increasing challenge. Not to mention there actually has been an influx of Ukrainians back into the areas that were formerly Russian controlled, and trying to settle back in. But the landscape is completely different.
If you have questions, again, if you have questions for either Derrick or Nataliya, put them in chat. This is a rare opportunity. And even if you don't have questions, if you'd like to make some comments, that too would be appropriate. Now, tell us though about the, if it wasn't your project, somebody had a project with Easter baskets, did they not?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that was Mark Lindquist. So he was a gentleman that we paired up with. And so he's actually been in Ukraine for at least a couple of weeks now. And I will say Ukrainians seem to celebrate Easter a bit differently than us. It's not necessarily bunnies and Easter eggs hiding in a field type of thing. The type of food and things like that is very different. But one of the things that Mark was doing, something that we were doing too, is just essentially trying to establish some sense of comfort, safety, normalcy when everything around them is in complete turmoil. And so he was going around and collecting all the supplies to create hundreds of essentially Easter baskets for families. And even just little things like that can really add up into some really, helpful, but also just like people see other people that actually care for them. And that in of itself provides a lot of value. They feel supported as a result.
Doing my research, I ran across something that you shared with the CAN community, and it was written by Shalini Balmilne. We live in an interconnected world, but we make decisions primarily motivated by what benefits us. Even though we're wired for empathy, research shows that it's largely reserved for people we consider to be in our in-group. This leaves vast groups of people not considered at all or even harmed by our decisions. Why did you feel it was useful to share that?
So I shared that before I went. And a big part of that is because that is what I've known to be true in my work at CAN. And one of the things that I found, just like to kind of bring it home in terms of my work at CAN, is that, we're literally in under-resourced neighborhoods. We're on the daily basis interacting with families. And that through those interactions, you're ultimately communicating and interacting with people you probably normally would not have some type of connection with. And then you do it long enough and you realize that there's not only so much more commonality, but there's also just this better understanding of each other and each other's challenges as well. And so when I saw what was going on in Ukraine, I knew that there was going to be a similar disconnect because, a lot of people don't know Ukrainians. They don't have any kind of direct connection to what's been going on here in the United States. And I knew that was going to be a huge issue. I also knew that NGOs and government agencies were nowhere near equipped to deal with the massive scale of what's unfolding. And sure enough, when I arrived, it was true. The bulk of the people that I saw actually doing like in providing resources and things like that were foreign volunteers, not even with a formal organization. They were just there out of like they themselves had that broader sense of interconnectedness than I had, that I had known to be true. And I wanted to basically use my understanding of this dilemma and be the conduit. Like, and literally this meeting is a case in point of being that conduit, that like, hey, you guys, a lot of the people in this meeting know me, and I went there, and these are the things that I saw and experienced, and these are the challenges, these are the amazing things. And that, I hope, can help bring more attention, more resources, and things like that. Because what's going on right now is still woefully inadequate. There is a lot of needless death that is occurring from fully preventable medical issues, but even environmental issues as well. Literally, like, you just spend 1 week in that environment. And I said that I sent this in one of my communications, which is basically like, I literally heard, seen, experienced more worse things in 1 week doing this work than my entire 14 years at CAN, as well as my time in the Marine Corps, including serving in a war. And this is on the border. This is not even in Ukraine. This is not in, Kyiv or Mariupol, which literally 2 hours on the border, I couldn't cross a family with several American colleagues of mine. And this woman and child had come from Mariupol, and we were using our translator apps. We're waiting in the line. We're helping her bring 6 to 7 bags across the border. She eventually shows us an article on her phone, and it's a video, a CNN video of this 11-year-old girl that got shot in the face. And then she turns her child's head, and there it is. This is the child in that video that had been shot in the face by a Russian. That Russian realized what happened. They actually took her and the child to the hospital. The child got treated, and we're now seeing them at the border 8 days later. That's just 2 hours in. That kind of stuff is extraordinarily common. And so, yeah, whatever we can do, like, it's needed badly.
Noemi, are there any questions?
Yeah, so one question is, where do the volunteers stay, eat when they're in Poland? Are they a drain on resources?
I would definitely say, if you're going to volunteer, bring resources. Like, yes, it can be helpful to, like, move things and things of that nature, but resources is what's really needed. Whether it be cash or certain kind of medical supplies. Cell phones is a huge issue right now as well. And there's a myriad of other ways to get plugged in that. But that same mindset is why I set only going for a total of 10 days, is because I knew that would have been ample time for me to allocate the resources that I could get. And then I needed to get myself out of the way, because I don't speak Russian, I don't speak Polish, I don't speak Ukrainian. And sure enough, like, I easily could have gone through that 32,000 in a single day and have no issue with it. And so in terms of where to stay, kind of depends. I was only in one border area, and a lot of us stayed in a hotel that was in Przemysl, which is like 15 minutes from the border. But there's also a lot of volunteers that have like either RV setups or tent setups and things like that are more directly on the border. But then there's also people in like Krakow and Warsaw that are working with refugees in that regard. And so again, you'd have access to things like hotels and things like that. Because the reality is, for a lot of refugees, they also don't have the resources to be booking more than a night or two in a hotel. And one of the things that's worth pointing out is just like, look at an American, like so many of us live paycheck to paycheck. And if one day somebody told you you had to leave and you can only take with what you can carry, you're going to be easily within a week for most Americans completely out of resources.
What countries are the refugees going to from Poland?
Nataliya actually would probably be way better to answer this one, because she has literally been helping navigate this particular challenge.
Yeah. Hi, thank you. Well, actually, from that Tesco, the refugee camp in Przemysl, where we met with Derrick. So volunteers from Germany, Sweden, the Netherlands, Denmark, Austria, France, Belgium, Finland, Italy, Spain, Southern Ireland, That's what I've seen. So they actually are there, they are present there, and they are arranging and organizing free bus transportations and accommodation for Ukrainian refugees in their countries. So this is the list that I know for sure that people are working on that. So mostly it's Europe.
Okay. Derrick, how did you get the resources that you brought with you? Was this your personal fund or did you raise the money somehow?
It was both. So in terms of like, travel and personal expenses and things like that, that was definitely personal expenses. And large part of it also came from my wife to help with this particular adventure. So in the 32,000 that I was mentioning, none of that is actual personal expenses, which was another like 3,500 to be incorporated into that. I also knew that cash was going to be a huge issue because you can only pull X amount of dollars when in another country. So I was literally carrying over $14,000 in cash on me. I couldn't wait to actually get that off my body. It felt so wrong in so many ways. I actually got connected from some folks here in Ann Arbor that had a contact in Krakow. And through that connection is where I also got linked up to an exchange person that you'd get a much better exchange rate compared to, like, let's say at the airport or train station, etc. So I was actually able to basically get it all converted into the Polish zloty. And then pretty quickly thereafter, I was out of cash.
Mm-hmm. So the last question here is, Biden made it sound like taking 100,000 refugees was a big deal. What do you think?
I'm sure it would be a big deal if they could actually get here. And that's the reality, is that there is a process for people to go through to get here. But most people don't know this, because these are people that literally, like, they weren't planning on leaving their country. A lot of them have never even left their town, let alone their country. And then now they're presented with this challenge of, like, where do I go? And in the refugee centers, what you'll find is these groups that basically help navigate their own government's process in a pretty robust way. So they'll even, like, book the busing, the trains, the ferries, the flights, all that kind of stuff. And there was none of that, at least in the area that I was at. And I was in two of the pretty large refugee camps as well. And so that conduit does not exist, at least at the time that I was there. And that was already a month in. And so not surprisingly, I think we've only seen a couple thousand refugees come to the United States. And it was actually an article that Chuck had shared that a lot of them are actually coming through the Mexican border. And the reason they're doing that is because it's kind of a way of bypassing that process. And that just, when you, like, see that happen, you just know that there's, like, something's broken in the system, that people are actually now going, what I would argue, in a much less safe route. Certainly, I would imagine even more expensive route to try to get into the United States. And so I'm sure there's a tremendous amount of demand, but there needs to be groups like Operation Aid that need to be set up where the refugees are, or else they're not going to come in any significant volume.
That's it, Chuck, for questions.
Thank you, Noemi. Well, you may be here. You listeners may be hearing from me at some point, because I'd like to do something about the need for cell phones. I'm researching that and may be looking for some help. May not. We'll see how this goes. And Noemi, if there's ever anything we can do, you know how to get a hold of me. No promises, but at least like to know what the request is, and perhaps we can help. Thank you so much. You inspire us. You give us hope in a very difficult time and in what is a very difficult world. And we very much appreciate you. Next week, 7 p.m., Sunday the 8th, I'm going to be interviewing the executive director of Voters Not Politicians, and we're going to talk about Promote the Vote 22 in particular. This is a constitutional amendment, and it is extremely badly needed, because the right to vote is going to be impeded if we do not pass this amendment. And talk about pernicious mischief. There's going to be legislation passed to make it very difficult for many people to vote. And this ballot initiative would override it. So please do it. Please do tune in next week and see what you can do to help, which is pretty darn easy. It consists of signing a ballot or signing a ballot petition. So good night to all. Good morning to one. And please be safe. Good night.
Good night. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank
Thank
you.
you, Chuck.